If you have an interest in horses and love learning more about horses, the horse industry, teaching, or even managing your own horse business, then you're in the right place. We would love you to join us on our mission, which is to improve the lives of horses around the world through the education of riders, handlers, and trainers. So get comfortable, listen in, and enjoy.
This has been another episode sponsored by Online Horse College. If you haven't had a look at the wide variety of equine-specific accredited courses, then go to onlinehorsecollege.com and I'll see you over there. If you need help with copywriting, public relations, social media, email marketing, graphic design or website design, then talk to Sophie at Archer Creative. She gives a wide range of services to help you increase your bottom line through investment in marketing dollars. Simply go to horsechats.com, search for Sophie, search for Barrington or search for Archer Creative to find her contact details. Our guest today again is Dr. Peter Huntington from Kentucky Equine Research. How are you, Peter?
Excellent. Thank you, Glenys.
Good having you back, Peter. Yeah, and I'm sure that people are picking up lots of advice on just how to look after their horses better. And I think if we just think about equine welfare, I think sometimes people just don't realise that they don't know. You know, they think they're looking after their horse, but all the information you're giving, it certainly gives a lot more depth into the care of horses. So I've got to thank you for that before we even start.
Well, there's plenty there, and unfortunately the rise of the internet and Dr. Google has meant that even though there's massive information, it's not always credible or correct.
No,
so I'll put in a plug for my book, Horse Sense, which is a general horse care book, Guide to Horse Care in Australia and New Zealand. So that's a good source of all-round information on looking after horses, not just the feeding or health stuff that we're talking about, but a whole host of other things. So that's stood the test of time. So,
well, I was just going to say, you know, even before the internet, Horse Sense was one of the best books around on horse care.
Yep, it's been good. I just hope they never want a third edition because it's too much
a lot of work. All right, now today we're going to talk about feeding horses who are prone to gastric ulcers. Tell us about gastric ulcers, the prevalence of gastric ulcers in horses.
Yeah, well, gastric ulcers, we've only become aware of the prevalence of them in recent times because when to diagnose gastric ulcer, you need a long endoscope, you need to fast a horse. And the original endoscopes that were developed, which is, you know, a long, thin tube with a light source that you put up the horse's nose so you look at the larynx or into the lungs, weren't long enough to go into the stomach. And it wasn't until, you know, relatively in the 90s when they developed longer endoscopes. So those older ones have been used for looking at the respiratory tract for years, but development of longer endoscopes meant that vets could look into the stomach, and then they found that amongst many populations there were massive gastric ulcers, so, you know, 90% in most racehorse populations, and even in sport horse populations quite high, you know, 40, 50, 60% of gastric ulcers. So ulcers occur in two different parts of the stomach, one in the top part of the stomach that's sort of meant to be the squamous portion where it's meant to be above the line in which the fluid-filled stomach contents sit, but also they come in the bottom part of the stomach, the gastric portion, and those gastric ones are more difficult to treat and manage. Very common. Are they always associated with, and I'm sort of cutting into my second point, why they occur in horses here, but are they always associated with problems? Probably not, but they're very common in horses.
Okay, well, tell us a little bit about that gastric anatomy then.
Okay, so the horse has a relatively small stomach, and it's got a very acid sort of contents, which is designed to start the process of digestion. So the acid helps break down food, break down bonds between protein and things like that. So it's an important part of digestion. So that is, of course, damaging to the lining of the stomach, but the lower part of the stomach where the fluid is meant to be has a protective mucus coating. And so that's resistant to acid damage, but the upper squamous part, which is sort of meant to be above the fluid, doesn't have the same coating, so it's quite susceptible to this acid damage. And one of the key things that happens is when horses are walking or trotting or cantering, as you can imagine, the fluid splashes around. And so instead of just staying in the lower gastric part of the stomach, it splashes up into the upper part, and that acid splash is irritating and leads to ulcer formation. And so exercise is one of the key risk factors, and that's related to that anatomy and the inability of the upper part of the stomach to be protected against the acid.
Okay, so if exercise is a key risk factor, are there any other particular times that we might get at gastric ulcer formation?
Well, I think there's you can get it from prolonged use of phenylbutazone.
Mm-hmm.
You can get it from fasting. So, when the horse isn't eating, not chewing, and they're not producing saliva, and the saliva has bicarbonate in it, which helps buffer the acid. Acid production still continues. So the horse that's not eating is fasting is, again, one of the risks. And if you take the horse out of a paddock and you sort of, not quite starve the horse, but give it a couple of meals a day with not great ability to eat through the rest of the day, then that can bring ulcers on very quickly. So the risk times are horses that don't have enough to eat. They don't spend enough of their time eating.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the key things. Now, there are risks about the amount of starch or the amount of grain. So the more starch that goes in the diet, the higher the risk of gastric ulcers. Exercise is a key risk. There are surveys done about risk factors like leaving the radio on in racing stables was found to be a risk. Maybe they had those Sydney shock jocks on, and that was terrifying the horses. But it was certainly there are lots of risk factors being identified. Stressiness is thought to be one of those. But I think a key thing is the horse that's not eating, the horse that's standing and windsucking, for example,
yep.
or weaving. It's not eating, so it's not chewing, it's not producing saliva, it's not putting food in the stomach that helps sort of buffer the acid. It's got an increased risk as a result of that.
Okay, so if we talk about the risk, what about the symptoms? How, it's so common. How do we know if a horse has got gastric ulcers?
Well, the only definitive way is to get the horse scoped.
Okay.
And to do that, not every vet has these specialised scopes. You need to fast the horse overnight to get it scoped and then look into the stomach. So that's a bit more complicated than just having a look at the larynx or pharynx or into the trachea.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some horses show no abnormal signs at all, but other horses will show, and this is sort of all, I guess it's association, it's not cause, but they'll show perhaps reduced appetite, or a sort of picky eater, eats a little bit, then pulls away. Behaviour changes. The horse that's cranky, eats. The cranky horse that puts his ears back about things, about the approach of people in the stable, that's associated with gastric ulcers. Certain people tend to associate girthiness, but I really struggle with that a bit.
Okay.
And there are some research that shows that it has a sort of physiological link to about exercise and physiology. So there are potential signs there, and therefore an association with poor performance. Loss of body condition. So the horse is just, you get a group of horses being fed the same, or you get your horse that you're feeding what you think's plenty, and the horse just isn't holding condition well enough. And there may be factors, a lot of factors there, but gastric ulcers are one of the things that come to mind.
All right, so say we've got the diagnosis. What's the initial treatment then?
Well, the best treatment is to use omeprazole, which is the drug that is also widely used in humans for gastric ulcer treatment and prevention. And there are a variety of pastes out there that can be given, and they need to be given for a sort of 2 to 4 week period. And in most cases, they'll cause rapid healing of squamous gastric ulcers. With the ones in the gastric portion of the gut that are less common but harder to treat, then that maybe need to be combined with another sort of treatment. And there's an oral supplement called sucralfate, which is valuable in the sort of management of those situations. So that's the initial treatment. But then the problem is if you stop that treatment and the risk factors to the ulcer stay the same, e.g. you're working the horse, you're feeding it, it's not eating all day, all of these factors, then the ulcers are likely to come back. And so that's where you've probably got to do some other things relating to the feeding and management.
Okay, so if we've got a horse with gastric ulcers, what should we do then regarding feeding them, management? What tips have you got for us there?
There's sort of a few aspects to that. One is to try and keep the horse eating as much as you can, and ideally have horse having ad lib access to forage. Now, in a drought, that can be difficult because whilst it's all very well to say, well, put them out in a paddock and let them eat grass all day. If there isn't grass there, they can't do it. So then you keep hay in front of the horse. Now, still, you can do that and the horse doesn't eat. Might walk up and down the fence or sing out to its neighbours or whatever. But having feed in front of the horse is a key factor. And then you can look at the types of forages that you feed and the types of concentrates and perhaps some other supplements and things like that might be useful.
Mm-hmm. So the forage, I know that you said, in the drought it's going to be a bit tricky, but is there any that we should have or should avoid?
Well, no, we should have lucerne.
Okay.
So if we're worried about gastric ulcers, lucerne, or perhaps to a slightly lesser extent clover, but mainly lucerne is the thing we want. And the protein and the calcium in the lucerne are great buffers. And so feeding your horse, lucerne hay is, lucerne hay or lucerne chaff, found to be preventative, and there's some good research showing that just doing that will help ulcers heal or reduce the risk of them occurring.
Mm.
Now, one of the times I think you can feed lucerne is before you work the horse. And remember I mentioned this sort of splash of acid when you're working the horse.
Yep.
If you've got the horse that's sort of just eaten some lucerne hay, then that's putting some buffering in the stomach, but it's also putting that physical sort of barrier because the hay is not going to be completely digested and there'll be stalks of hay and it floats on the top of the surface of the stomach and stops the splash of the acid. So I've seen people have taken, have scoped horses and taken videos on treadmills and shown when they are fed, there's a lot less splash. So either just feeding lucerne hay or if you're feeding some hard feed, a little bit of hard feed and a little bit of lucerne chaff, half an hour to an hour before they work is good management.
Okay. So I'm thinking, if we've got the lucerne clover, if we've got it, but lucerne, what about the concentrate feed options? What should
concentrate? You're trying to avoid high starch feeds, which is really high grain feeds. And to do that, you've got to get energy sources from other. So your fibre, plenty of fibre, we've already said feed plenty of fibre, but also fat. And there's certain types of fat are beneficial with gastric ulcers. And normally we talk about the benefits of omega-3 fatty acids, but in this instance it's omega-6 fatty acids have protective effects. And research has shown that they will have protective effects in terms of reducing acid secretion and protective prostaglandins. And if we're talking omega-6 fatty acids, we're talking oils like corn oil or sunflower oil, or rice bran oil, or even rice bran itself, say like Equijul. They're great sources of, so they're calorie sources, means you need less energy from your grains or your starches, and they're also a source of omega-3 fatty acids.
Okay. So we've talked about the concentrate. What about any additives? Is there any we should give or any we should avoid?
Yeah, there are some horses that go off the sort of treatment course of their metrazole and go on to a maintenance one, which might be a quarter dose that's given every day. Or there are some people who go, okay, I'm going to look at when it's a risky time, such as I go away to a competition, or an event. So, my feed changes, my management changes. I've got time when the horse is travelling and competing, and that's when I'll sort of treat the horse or put it on the preventative dose. There are some other supplements around with antacids that you can get. So we've actually added to Equijul a substance, a buffered mineral complex, which has an antacid effect. So that's helping mop up the acid. And there are some other supplements such as, that's also in some feeds like, say, Barastock Complete Performer, and some other antacids and stomach coating agents in things like Nalox, which is a supplement of ours. Or there's some other supplements out there that can do a decent job in terms of providing a coating effect, a coating effect for antacid. Now, they won't cure the ulcers, but they'll perhaps prevent them recurring or prevent the symptoms occurring. They make the horse feel better feel better, they eat better, they're in better condition, and they're happier. And I think the unhappy horse is certainly one of the, when you've got an unhappy horse, I'd much rather look at causes of that rather than just reach for some sort of calming supplement or calming injection. So look at the potential causes.
Okay. And ideally, we've got horses that don't have gastric ulcers. So what can we do? What sort of management, feeding, just to maintain a healthy stomach, so we don't have to worry even, we can omit the first fit and just say, well, let's just do this.
Well, I think it's remembering things about meal size. So remembering, enough forage for the horse to eat, the meal size in terms of concentrates, not too big a meals, trying to sort of minimise the starch that's in the diet, and if you use alternative sources such as fat, or by slowing the concentrate intake down by using chaff or things like Fibre Pro and sort of fibre sources or Speedy Beet or this type of thing, which is mixed in with the grain that then helps slow down the grain intake, and so we're not having quite the same insult. We want the horse that eats quickly to maybe eat slower. Putting instructions in the feed bin can be useful, so it takes a bit of time. If it gets through its hay really quickly, then look at a small whole hay net or perhaps two of them, so it slows down. So it sort of spins the feed out, and they'll be eating smaller amounts over a longer period of day, rather than guzzling the whole thing down in 5 minutes like a teenage boy eating their dinner.
Yep. All right. Very good, Peter. And as usual, I should say, very good. Lots of information. Now, if people would like more, they can go to horsechats.com, search for Peter Huntington, and there's lots of information there. But Peter, if people would like more, how can they find out through Kentucky Equine Research?
Well, we've got an advice line. So if they want something done for their specific horse, we've got an advice line, which is advice@ker.com. or 1-800-772-198, or if they look on Equinews. So go to our website and then go to the library section, and you can do a search on the Equinews website, and there'll be heaps of articles about gastric ulcers there, about management of them, about prevention, about risk factors, and you can also sign up for the fortnightly electronic newsletter.
Perfect. All right, Peter, thank you very much, and look forward to chatting to you again next month.
That'll be good. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Now, if you're still there, you probably know that I'm absolutely passionate about education within the horse industry. That's why I host this podcast. My other venture is Online Horse College. Have a look now at onlinehorsecollege.com, and I'll see you over there.
Remember that our comments and instructions are general in nature and do not take into consideration your individual horses or your individual ability and circumstances. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please leave your comment below.